It's time for Fresh Oil with singer-songwriter and pastor Keith Manley, a program designed to minister the gospel of God's grace and to bring fresh oil to the brokenhearted. And now, with today's program, Pastor Keith Manley.
Welcome to the Friday edition of Fresh Oil. I'm your host, Keith Manley, and I'm so glad you joined me for the program. This week, we've been in our series, Generational Faith, Passing the Baton Well. And what a week it's been. We started with Lois and Eunice, planting genuine faith in Timothy from childhood. We went to Deuteronomy 6 and learned how faith gets woven into the car rides and the dinner tables and the bedtimes of ordinary life. We sat with the sobering warning in Eli's story, a good man whose avoidance at home cost him everything. And yesterday, we watched Naomi pour something so real and so genuine into Ruth that a young foreign woman chose to leave everything she'd ever known just to follow the God she'd seen working in an older woman's broken life. Today, I want to bring this whole week home with something very practical. And I want to be honest with you right up front about why I think this particular program might be the most important one of the week. Because here's the thing. I have watched well-meaning, genuinely faithful parents and grandparents push the people they love the most, their own children, their own grandchildren, further away from faith, not because they didn't care, but because of how they went about it. Too hard, too often, too preachy, too much pressure. And the sad irony is that the people who care the most about passing on faith are sometimes the ones most likely to accidentally make the people they're trying to reach feel like faith is a burden being loaded onto their back rather than a gift being placed in their hands. So today I want to talk honestly about how to pass it on without pushing them away. And I think what we're going to find is that the most effective thing you can do is usually the most natural thing. And the least effective thing is usually the most forced. Let me start with what I'd call the number one mistake I've seen parents and grandparents make, and it's this: treating every interaction with a child or grandchild as a ministry opportunity. Now, I know that sounds almost backwards, because isn't that what this whole week has been about? Weaving faith into the ordinary moments? Yes, but there's a world of difference between faith that flows naturally out of a genuine relationship and faith that gets inserted into every conversation like a scheduled announcement. Children and teenagers especially have a finely tuned radar for when they're being managed spiritually. And the moment they feel like every time they're around grandma or grandpa or mom or dad, they're about to get another lesson, they start to pull back. Not because they hate God, but because nobody wants every single interaction with someone they love to feel like a class they didn't sign up for. I think about the way Jesus handled this, because I think he's actually the best model we have for this kind of thing. Jesus never seemed to be in a hurry to make a spiritual point. He sat with people. He ate with them. He asked them questions, real questions, not leading questions designed to get to a predetermined conclusion. He went to their parties. He told stories that made people laugh and think at the same time. He was genuinely interested in the people in front of him, not just in the message he wanted to deliver to them. And the result was that people wanted to be around him. People who were considered spiritual outsiders, tax collectors, prostitutes, people the religious establishment had written off. They wanted to be near Jesus. Not because he lowered the bar spiritually, because he absolutely didn't, but because they felt genuinely known and genuinely loved in His presence. And that made everything he said land differently than it would have otherwise. That's the model for passing faith to the next generation. Relationship first. Always relationship first. The spiritual content flows through the relationship, not around it, not instead of it, not despite a weak relationship, through it. Which means the single most important investment you can make in the faith of your child or grandchild isn't finding the right devotional book or the right curriculum or the right Christian camp. It's building a relationship with them deep enough and real enough that your voice actually carries weight when it matters. So let me get practical, because I promised you practical today, and I intend to deliver. Let me give you several things that actually work, drawn from Scripture and from 40-plus years of watching real families navigate this. The first one is this: ask more questions than you give answers. This one is huge, and it goes against every instinct most of us have when we're passionate about something we want someone else to believe. When a child or grandchild says something about God or faith or the Bible or church, even something you disagree with, even something that makes you a little nervous, resist the urge to immediately correct it or answer it. Ask a question back. That's interesting. What makes you think that? Where do you think you picked that up? How does that sit with you? Questions do several things that answers can't do. They communicate that you're genuinely interested in what the other person thinks, not just waiting for your turn to talk. They invite the person into their own faith process rather than handing them conclusions they didn't arrive at themselves. And they create a kind of conversation where the younger person actually wants to keep talking rather than shutting down because they feel like they're about to get corrected again. The second thing that actually works is sharing your own story honestly, including the hard parts. Not as a lecture, not as an object lesson with a tidy moral at the end, just honestly. You know what? I remember a time when I wasn't sure God was even real, and here's what happened. I went through a season where I was really angry at God, and I want to tell you about it. I made this mistake, and it cost me, and here's what I learned. Younger people are deeply attracted to honesty and deeply repelled by performance. When they see that your faith has been tested, has had questions, has survived real doubt and real failure, it becomes something they can actually imagine for themselves. A faith that looks perfect from the outside, that never admits struggle or doubt or failure, is actually harder to receive than one that says, this is real, this is mine, and it hasn't always been easy, and it's still the best thing in my life. The third thing is to make the time you spend with your kids and grandkids genuinely enjoyable, without an agenda. I know that sounds too simple to be spiritual advice, but I mean it with everything I've got. Go fishing. Play the game they like, even if you're terrible at it. Watch the movie they're excited about. Learn the thing they're into well enough to ask real questions about it. Laugh with them. Be someone they actually look forward to being around. Because here's the truth. All the spiritual input in the world doesn't land well in a relationship that a child or grandchild finds obligatory or uncomfortable. But when they genuinely love being with you, when they light up a little when they see you, when they seek you out, then the things you say about God, the way you live your faith, the values you model, all of it gets absorbed almost without them even realizing it. That's Deuteronomy 6 working. That's the when you walk along the road principle in action. Faith flowing naturally through the texture of a relationship people actually want to be in. The fourth thing, and this one takes some courage, is to be willing to talk about hard questions without flinching. Kids and teenagers and young adults today have hard questions about faith. They're not being rebellious when they ask them most of the time. They're trying to figure out what's real and what they actually believe for themselves, which is exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And if the message they get from you, from church, from the culture around faith they grew up in, is that certain questions aren't welcome, that doubt is dangerous, that asking the wrong thing out loud might get you in trouble spiritually, they won't stop having the questions. They'll just stop bringing them to you. And that is a much worse outcome than an uncomfortable conversation. So when your grandchild says something like, "Grandpa, I'm not sure I believe any of this anymore," or your teenager says, "Mom, I don't understand how a good God could let this happen," don't panic. Don't immediately go into damage control mode. Take a breath and say, "Tell me more about that. I really want to understand what you're thinking." You don't have to have a perfect answer. You don't have to resolve every question in one conversation. What you have to do is stay in the conversation, stay curious, stay connected, and trust that a God who is real is not threatened by honest questions about whether He's real. The fifth thing I want to give you is this: pray with them, not just for them. There is a significant difference between telling someone you're praying for them and actually praying with them, out loud, in real time, in front of them. Now, I know for some of you that feels awkward. Maybe you didn't grow up in a home where people prayed out loud spontaneously. And the idea of just stopping in the middle of a conversation and saying, "Can I pray with you about that right now?" feels uncomfortable. I understand that. But I want to challenge you to push through the awkwardness, because what happens when a grandparent or parent prays out loud with a child, specifically, honestly, using their real name, talking to God about the actual thing they just shared, is unlike almost anything else in the spiritual formation toolkit. It makes God tangible. It makes prayer real. It shows the child that prayer isn't just something you do in church with your eyes closed. It's something you do in the middle of real life when something real is happening. And they carry that picture with them for the rest of their lives. I want to tell you something I've observed over and over again in families I've pastored. The children who grow up and keep their faith, who don't walk away from God when they leave home, who come back to Him even if they do wander for a season, almost universally describe some version of the same thing when you ask them what kept them tethered. They describe a person, not a program, not a curriculum, not a church event, a person who loved them genuinely, who was real with them about their own faith journey, who made God feel like a living reality rather than a set of rules, and who prayed with them like God was actually in the room. Sometimes that person was a parent. Sometimes it was a grandparent. Sometimes it was a Sunday school teacher they still think about 30 years later. But it was always a person, always a relationship, always something lived and real and warm, rather than formal and obligatory and pressured. Thanks for joining me this week. Walk in grace.
Thanks for joining us today for Fresh Oil with Pastor Keith Manley. Fresh Oil is an outreach of Grace Family Church in Rockford, Illinois, and can be heard each weekday at this same time. You can reach us online at weneedgod.com. Until next time, remember, God's love for you is unconditional, that He makes His mercies new every morning.